make you feel more confident in the Adobe Experience Manager and Adobe product certification world. And it's generally high value. And so if you're interested in being a certified Adobe developer, engineer, practitioner, feel free to scan the QR code. As I mentioned earlier, these housekeeping rules for us are important. Just if you're attending these meetings, do not try to contact other people outside of the user groups without their consent. Don't use the people's information to share and all that good stuff. Just be a good sport and don't share information without anyone's consent. Also, before we start recording, I wanted to mention that this is going to be a recorded event. So just make sure that you know you're okay, you're comfortable with being recorded and participating in the conversation, if you will. But if you don't want to participate in this conversation and recorded session, feel free to watch the recording later and see it on demand. If you have any questions, you have any questions about this event or other events, send an email to advocacy@adobe.com. And that completes our housekeeping slides. We're going to go back to the conversation here, and we will start with a question that we have. Actually, let me introduce everyone here because I forgot that most important part so that you know who's answering your questions. I guess we'll go in my screen from left to right. I'll introduce myself to get it out of the way. I'm Greg Dimeris. I'm a web content product owner at T. Rowe Price Financial Industry. And I've worked with AEM since 2009, probably when it was CQ5 at the time. So a lot of content authoring, administration, and currently in the process of migrating to cloud. So we're excited about that. And I'll pass it on to my right in my screen to other champions. We'll start with Rami.
Somehow I knew I was going to be me first.
Yes, sir.
Okay. So every time I unmute, I have 10 Mississippi's worth of time or Brett is going to yell at me. So I have to say everything quickly. So name is Rami Aldamal. I am right. Director of Rede Consulting. We're a consulting agency that does everything from AEM to AEP to all that stuff in between with the Adobe stack. I have done AEM 14, 15 years now. That includes starting from scratch, back to foundation components, core components, and all this good stuff. Going into EDS as well. I've done my share on those. When it comes to JAMStack, that's the one part that I have not done in the past, and that's typically where I just pass it to Daniel and move on from there. Very happy to be here today, and just because it's a showdown, I decided to bring boxing gloves. That's just in case. My 10 Mississippi's are up. Thank you.
Thank you, Rami. Daniel.
Hey everyone, I'm Daniel Stremecki from Croatia, Europe, and I also have a small consultancy, so a managing director there, but actually everything from secretary to managing director. Also solution architect for AEM, and been working with AEM around 10 plus years, specializing in complex enterprise solutions and fixing projects where others have failed, basically. And regarding my experience, I mostly worked with, as everyone I guess started with classic AEM, but after that I took deep dives into both EDS and especially JAMStack. So really looking forward to this panel discussion.
Thank you, Daniel. Brett, let's introduce you next.
Sure. So Brett Birschbach, Executive Director of DX ROI, working with a lot of different companies on Adobe technologies as well as others. I've personally been doing hands-on work in Adobe technologies for over 10 years now. A lot of hands-on implementations for enterprises on classic Adobe Experience Manager as well as Edge Delivery Services in the last few years. I've managed teams of over probably a couple hundred AEM projects at this point. So a lot of different experience, some of it hands-on, some of it through the teams that I've worked with, and excited to be here having the discussion.
Yep. Thank you, Brett. Tad.
Hey, Tad Reeves. I'm a principal architect at Arbery Digital. I've been in. I'm relatively new to AEM compared to Greg. I've only been in since 2010, and I haven't done very many projects compared to Brett. I think I've only done 72. So yes, I'm the newbie here. But I started out in infrastructure of the sysadmin for a long time, and then segued into other project architecture. But I've since kind of changed my tune from being cloud critic to EDS supporter. So in the ring in this particular match, I think I'm going to be repping EDS for the most part.
Awesome. Great qualifications, everyone. I hope we make everyone's time here worth while watching and learning from this. We got about 57 right now participants on the call, so that's great. And just to let you know how this is going to work, we're going to throw some questions to different champions here in the session, but feel free to participate. Use the Q&A tab here or menu to post your questions, and we'll try to provide as many answers as we can. But always feel free to reach out to us through like advocacy at adobe.com or through the Adobe Experience League discussions that we're all participating in. And generally let us know what you think about these sessions, but do post your questions here and we'll address them either today or in a future session. We'll start with, I guess, Rami, because we like to start with Rami. And we have a question about kind of looking how the AEM has progressed the last 5 years. If you could, Rami, describe the typical AEM front end setup before Universal Editor and Edge Delivery Services, and how it entered the picture in the last 5 years, and how much has this changed, and what do you think is the most probably important aspect of all these last 5 years and how the process changed?
Okay. He's giving me open-ended questions. It's not my fault. So now, right? Let's go through sort of the evolution really quickly. So AEM, when we say classic, you're talking about database, which is the JCR content repository, essentially Java content repository. That still sort of exists as we go through, and I won't go into EDS because there are cases where the JCR is still being used, but let's focus on the front end. Simply had components. At some point there were JSPs. Do you remember those? And then they became HTL, which is more familiar to front-end folks. But the evolution, just to see the trend, what Adobe was trying to do ever since they got the product from DayCQ till today is to simplify the development process. Some things were limited by the technology of AEM from CQ back in the day and how things render. So they started by taking JSPs, which sort of squished that MVC into this one single file, and they split that. And then you had HTL, which governed the front end versus the back end. And this is truly where you started seeing front end versus back end. It wasn't really just all blended in. Then you had client libs, which had your CSS and your JS, and eventually you were able to compile things like Sass, and things got modernized. But again, through the trend, even if you look at the archetypes of AEM, a big evolution that happened, as simple as it might sound, is UI front end. So before you have client libs, and they were always with the components, each component would have its own client lib, and then you can either serve them separately as separate requests, or sort of squish them all into one big blob. But then they split that, and then you had the UI front end. And honestly, to front end folks, that was an evolution, because now you have the back end that do the Java development, and they would do the HTL. And essentially all the front end needs to do is go, give me the IDs, give me the classes that I need to target, and I'll make the page tick, right? You were still limited by your CSS, by your JS. And then things got a little more interesting. And then we started doing single page application using components. We were able to sort of jam, and I will actually use the word jam React in there because I still think it came with its own downfall, but again, I'm not going to go in depth into that. But you'll see that the trend has always been try to sort of break front end from back end. I personally, when I used to interview for AEM, I was looking for full stack developers because there's no way I can have a full front end versus a back end. It was very hard to deal because you're passing these tickets back and forth. Today, I can comfortably say, hey, you can focus on back end and you can focus on front end. ADS is, so going from the classic dialogue and everything else going into ADS, to me, that's the next normalized evolution where it's like, okay, let's have the heavyweight. So truly going more towards, not monolithic, let's just go more towards microservices where you can go, let's fully decouple. And there were attempts in the middle before ADS. So again, putting single page applications in AEM was an attempt. Having components render, React, etc., was an attempt. But naturally going into EDS where you fully decouple is the big evolution or the big difference where you can have front end folks come in and do JavaScript, etc., and create blocks. And I'm going to stop here. I can keep going, but I'll stop just for you, Brad.
5 years and 5 minutes. Awesome. Yeah, I do. Anyone else who wants to jump in from the champions? The question was, looking 5 years back, how would you describe the typical AEM front end setup before Universal Editor and Edge Delivery Services enter the picture, and how much has this changed? Clock is ticking. You can answer. No, kidding.
I think Rami
And
nailed
folks
it,
on the
actually.
chat, please feel free to ask questions as we go through this as well.
Yep.
I'm sorry, did I cut you off, Brett?
No, I was just complimenting you. I thought you nailed it.
I will be seeding questions as well in the chat, but do use the Q&A more than the chat, so we can know which one's a question that we can answer for you guys. But I will be seeding these questions in there as well. All right. Well, clearly what Rami described was, a journey. We all remember the good old days, and for when you kind of talked about the profile of the developer you were looking at, Rami. I wanted to ask this question to Daniel. Has the front-end developer profile in AEM projects changed? And for example, are we seeing fewer AEM specific skill sets and more general JavaScript React expertise? How does that play out from your experience?
Yeah, actually, I think it did change a lot, and it goes, I think, in the same direction what Rami just explained. So this whole evolution of development, splitting front end and back end, of course, made a significant impact of what kind of profiles you were looking for. Because if you were doing AEM X years ago, you would be looking for full stack devs, or at least front-end devs that know how to work with AEM. So they had to know how to deal with HTL, how to deal with client libraries, and a couple of more things that are specific to AEM. And the more experience front-end dev would be, I think they would be more capable of getting it right from the first try. We're talking now about performance and build, and not loading all the components at once, but loading only the ones that you actually use, etc. But this, of course, today looks a lot different, because today we have JAMStack, we have EDS, but even this separation in sometimes in the classic AEM project where frontend is fully decoupled. So there are also other types of technologies used. For example, I've seen web components used a lot for a while, maybe not so trendy anymore, but also one way how to split frontend and backend. And then frontend becomes kind of its own repository, or at least a module. And then, of course, you can have people that focus only on frontend. You pick your frontend technology. It might be plain JavaScript in EDS, or it might be React or Next.js. And then you're looking for people who have specific expertise in this specific framework, or again, vanilla JS. There are not that many, there is no more that necessity that you need to have a front end that is familiar with AEM. But I would say it for sure doesn't hurt, especially in the start of the project. I think it's very, very valuable. Even if you use EDS, or even if you use Next.js, whatever it is still valuable to have at least one person in your front-end team who is familiar with AEM and how it used to be done, I think that experience and that know-how is still valuable. It's maybe not as comparable as before. So
Yeah, agreed. And since you talked about the classic approach, let's move to a question that deals with classic AEM. What's the most underrated advantage of staying on classic HTL components in 2025? I guess I will direct that question to Brett, and then anyone else can jump in and let us know. Also, you can let us know in the comments if you want.
Sure. So, I mean, in terms of why would you still maybe want to consider classic? Because I think there is, some evolutions. There's always the temptation to like move on to the next evolutions. Am I being left behind? And just understanding that classic does have some features and benefits that are there that I think people do sometimes overlook. Does that mean you should stay there? That's still for you to decide. But one of the things is you've got literally 25 years of features, enhancements, thousands of sites that have hardened these capabilities in classic AEM. And the way that I would kind of summarize it is classic AEM was kind of built with the perspective of what could anybody possibly ever want to do ever. And so like they build these very, very, very complex and flexible subsystems that let you do anything you could possibly want. Now, the downside of that is if you don't need some of that complexity is still there, right? And so that's where it can seem like, hey, this is more complexity than I need if you're not using all that. What Edge Delivery Service has done is kind of flip that same question on the head and said, for CMS, I'm going to solve the same CMS problems, but I'm going to solve it from the perspective of what do you most likely need for most cases? And that's what we're going to support. And so by taking down the complexity and getting rid of certain complexities, you can solve certain use cases much, much simpler without certain types of knowledge and such. So like great example is page templates and content policies. If you work with those in the back end of AEM or in the UI and then push them across all the servers, there's complexity there. There's no getting around it. Sure. Edge Delivery Service takes that complexity out. For your first site, maybe you don't need that. For your next site, though, if you do want that, that's where, hey, if you have classic AEM, those capabilities are available to you if you need or want them. And then the other one that I'll throw out there is like things that maybe don't belong in the CMS. With classic AEM, a lot of times you can put them in the CMS. And with other things such as Edge Delivery, you'll need to consider, hey, this tool doesn't solve this, so I need to have another tool that solves this. So a great example on a current client I'm working, they want to be able to store a permanent version history of pages. So in classic AEM, I can render that page on the back end using a request dispatcher and get that HTML and throw it into the JCR. Yeah. Should a CMS do that? We can debate that all day. In Edge Delivery, you just say, nope, CMS doesn't support that. That's not a CMS thing. Have an external tool do that for you. And so, kind of pick your way that you want to go. I would say, with the monolith, you do have the benefit of doing things that can all kind of self-contain in this system without involving additional tools and additional infrastructure to store these things elsewhere outside if you're doing some of these non-perfect CMS use cases.
Yeah, that's great feedback, Brett. I'm sure we all have experienced a lot of the issues you talked about, and we've seen a lot of the angles you talked about. I'm gonna switch to the chat, the Q&A, not chat, the Q&A, and I'm gonna look at a question that came from Ruff. If a customer in AEM that has a lot of experience and history with a traditional AEM, if they're looking to use React Next.js to build out their experiences, would the universal editor and experience fragments be a reasonable authoring solution? Or should they consider going to content fragments and possibly going the headless route, which is something we're looking at my organization to, like talking about this all the time.
Can I have that?
Yeah. Go ahead, Daniel.
Thank you. I think it's a complicated question, obviously, to answer, since we don't know the whole story behind this customer. But if they're using AEM for a while, then I think it's safe to assume that they like the WYSIWYG authoring.
Yeah.
And if that's a requirement that they want to keep it, the editors like it, then I would say like the universal editor is definitely the way to go. There are of course other things to consider. You could use Next.js in this what I call like a hybrid mode, where you still use universal editor and AEM sites, but then you deliver your sites with Next.js with like called pre-rendering. You could of course go fully headless and use content fragments, but then you lose maybe not necessarily lose the WYSIWYG. I mean, you could use content fragments with universal editor as well and avoid sites, but I don't really see a point in that, to be honest. I prefer to use sites with universal editor, but both options are possible.
I agree.
So universal editor has opened, the door to any frontend solution, and it's actually one of the coolest features, in my personal opinion, that I've seen released by Adobe in the last few years, because it really allows us to do anything we want on the front-end part.
I tend to agree, and a lot of our content authors, just anecdotally, were excited to see the universal editor and what it can do. So, anyone else weigh in on this question?
Just a quick 2 cents, because you've mentioned a couple different things, and honestly, in my opinion, they're a little different. I would not put experience fragment and content fragment almost in the same paragraph, because they do serve two very drastically different things, right? If you want to run AEM headless, now if you want to do the full decoupling, have the data be in AEM, and then have whatever, and I won't go into another Adobe product, so I'm not going to go into universal editor or whatever. Let's just say you have an Next.js application that's purely front-end based, doesn't have the library or anything to do with AEM. You just want to use essentially services to be able to pull that information from AEM. What you're looking for is pure structured data. That is your content fragment, right? It's essentially a tabulation, but instead of it looking like a table, it looks like a little dialogue, and each dialogue is a single record within your table. So again, structured content is one thing. Experience fragments naturally will have noise. So it depends on what you're trying to serve. Do you want to bring the HTML with the content? If that's the case, use experience fragments. So if you want to go and best example that we usually use is your header and footer. So let's say you have a header and footer that you want to use on AEM, but you want to use it on a different application, let's say. So you want, for consistency's sake, you want to be able to pull all that information, including the HTML, and then CSS it. Then that's where experience fragment comes in. It's very good when you want the DOM to come with it, but it's not structured data, and do not deal with it as structured data. It will bite you from experience.
Yeah. On a related note, since it's a comment that I see from Yegor, in AEM core components and them not supporting universal editor necessarily, it's not developed as like a universal editor is nowhere near classic sites editor, like Yegor is saying. What are our thoughts on it, Daniel? I guess.
I'm not sure if I would agree with that statement, because like we are, comparing like something that's been out for many years, and features have been coming out like every month.
Yeah.
And I expect like something similar to happen with the universal editor, especially now when Adobe marked it as the go-to editor for the future. So I am sure that at the moment there are features missing. Yes, I see it as well. I've been raising feature requests, but those features will come, and like the product is maturing. So there are sometimes also like for example, like I think of multi-field like all the time, and I think Martin did a great presentation on Summit on that and showed a couple of examples how you can deal with it, right? There's no composite multi-field, but the question is, do we really need it? I mean, we can also do the same thing with subcomponents. So I think there are solutions to most problems. Also with MSM support now added, and things will come in the future. It is purposefully limited for extensibility, and that's also maybe not a bad thing, even though also I, as a developer architect, sometimes hate it that I can't add anything I would like to. So you can't just add a piece of JavaScript to do whatever you want. But if you look at it from a CMS perspective, and it makes a lot of sense for Adobe to explicitly tell us, here are the things you can extend. And if you think about all the projects historically that we've seen that went really wild in terms of like customizing the editor experience, then it makes even more sense. So yeah, I hope that answers that question.
Okay, sure. So I haven't heard a lot from Tad, so I want to move to the edge delivery services approach. Tad, I hope you're doing okay there. I know
I'm all right, man. I'm trying to be quieter than I usually am.
Cool. So I'll move to a question about edge delivery service, and then we'll address a question Ravi submitted. So edge delivery services promises fast by default. That's the motto. How true is that in real world enterprise projects?
I mean, I'd say in real world that is the case. I mean, you so in AEM, you take a lot of classic or long-term AEM customers, and this is, I guess, this gets back also to one of the earlier questions that we didn't necessarily get a chance to answer in detail. Rami gave a great reply, but this is the classic page editor where you're at risk for delaying optimization or modernization and stuff like that. I mean, the thing is that on a classic page editor, yes, it's got so many super mature features that have been around for literally over two decades at this point. But the problem is a lot of those customers have been using those features for over 2 decades.
Right.
And so they have, in a lot of cases, code bases that have been upgraded either well or poorly or halfway or something like that from CQ55, and they did a 6 upgrade, and they partially upgraded some other things, and then they somehow made it onto AMS, and then so on and so forth. And now that's the code base they have, and they might have a whole bunch of go-to components that are ridiculously overloaded and are brittle and are causing all manner of performance problems. And so without a complete top-down, let's do the whole thing again, which is, as we all know, not particularly cheap, then it goes to, okay, well, how do you increase performance? And for edge delivery, it is pretty performant by default, and then you implement it, and it is somewhat difficult to make a poor performing edge delivery site. You have to kind of go out of your way to make a poor performing edge delivery site. And what we've launched so far is pretty performant out of the box.
Yeah. Okay. Cool.
Like it's not. I don't think that like the on the marketing materials and on the glossy brochures it says Lighthouse 100, and that's entirely possible. Is it entirely possible to do Lighthouse 100 classic AEM site? It is possible, but it takes some talent.
Yeah. So something similar to what you're talking about and related to that is Ravi's question about use cases to moving to JAMStack or EDS from classic traditional AEM HTL based. What situations should one think to move to JAMStack or EDS? And I think Daniel and Rami could probably provide some answers here. But what are like some use cases? I know Tad in previous webinars that he's done, he's talked about scenarios, but are there any specific use cases you guys can think of to going? Yeah.
Well, one divider that I'd want to have us all each kind of talk to a little bit is because you've got the use case of the site, like what are the actual pages and experiences and so forth that you're creating? Is this a product page that is really, really meticulously designed and has all these different experiences, things sliding all over the place? The person's likely to be on the same page for a long time. They're browsing, a beautiful hotel room, and they're really getting down to like viewing videos and a 3D render, like all that. Is it that, or is this a a 10-page blog post about a video game update, and it's like literally 10,000 words worth of stuff with that took the author, on perhaps on classic AEM, it may have taken them an immense amount of effort to put that thing together.
Yeah.
It's the experience you're trying to create, but also what personnel do you have available to be able to implement this? Because you might also have cases where you just don't have a ton of AEM folks, or maybe you do have a bunch of people who are really, really good at Next.js.
Mm-hmm.
That really changes the math. That if you have nobody who knows anything about edge delivery, nobody who knows anything about doing AEM printing, and you have a bunch of Next.js people who've done a bunch of other Next.js stuff, then what is best is a different answer.
Yep.
Yeah, I can maybe add a few more things to that. So I
Yeah.
think the motivation can be different, but I think the most common one is that I've seen this with many clients, that they want to be up to date, because like Adobe, for example, AEM is their strategic decision to use this tool for their CMS, right? They're investing a lot into it, so they don't want to miss out on the new stuff. And there, if you want to use the latest and greatest from Adobe, not just get support, but also get like all the latest stuff, then you need to be on the latest technology. I think that's like the most common motivator, but there could be, a bunch of others. There could be your site is using completely client-side rendering with React, which just performs badly. No matter how you optimize it, you still need to load React in your browser, and you won't get as great performance as you can get with Next.js or EDS. And of course, there could be many more. Maybe Rami, you want to add some more? You mentioned document-based.
Sure. Honestly, that question is almost like the pinnacle of this call. And it's almost like, what is the right way to do things? The short answer is there's no right way to do things. That's what happens when you have a whole bunch of architects on the same call. I ain't going to give you an answer. I'm not that crazy. But no, it's fundamental to a lot of things. It has to do, so if you combine everything that has been said, what technology you're using, right? My question or my challenge to you is let's put platforms aside, right? Let's go back to HTML files and basic CSS and JS. That's how it all started, right? And then we started added things to it to define fast. So let's think of fast in 3 different columns. So you have one is the speed of the page, but that's not it. That's not the only thing, because also content authors, so time to market has become very essential. That's why you have all these optimization tools and personalization tools. They're selling you on the fact that it can just happen. So if you have a tool that's the page renders in half a second, to Tad's point, but some poor guy has to go in for 6 hours to write a blog page, that's not intuitive, right? And the third one is simply development, right? How long does it take? So if you think about it, it's everything we've talked about so far. And the right tool is the one that can give you sort of the average of all 3. You're not going to find one that does all 3, period. It's just that's not existent. The matter of the fact is, if you have everything very monolithic, and I think one of the questions that came up where, I'm a back-end developer, how can I look at EDS and figure out, is it going to do the same thing that I want it to do? No, it's not going to do everything AEM classically does, because AEM is a server, right? You have permutation, calculation power. You have somebody's computer under their desk that does some math for you, which is a lot different from edge delivery. Edge delivery is based on one, static content that's coming from whatever, regardless, whether it's document-based or anything else, right? Precompiled, put it on the CDN, it gets served, you live happily ever after. Now, if you want any complicated server-like systems, right? So you're pulling in APIs, it's based on microservices. So that's where you have to start going out and go, please give me A, B, and C, right? It's no longer, because you don't have that server right underneath it, right? So as you're going through these things, you have to understand not limitations, but what everything is meant for. If your website generally is monolithic, and that's one of the reasons, one of the answers that I gave is, I do not think, in my humble opinion, AEM classically is going anywhere. Not anytime soon, right? Now, keep in mind, we went to sleep and woke up and ChatGPT changed the whole world. Right? Nobody saw it coming. It was smack in the face. So can we go to sleep and something else will happen? Maybe. But based on trends and what I see today, the classic AEM is not going anywhere. What you're going to see again is more decoupling from the backend, the monolithic idea of AEM, where it was a single thing. Literally, AEM, when it started, it was database, application, dispatcher, which is your caching. It was this thing that literally replaced in an architecture diagram like 6 different things, right? And it was all just in this one big box. And they slowly started moving things around to not have it be very monolithic. So it serves a purpose, right? I'm not saying that everybody, like AEM doesn't have an expiry date and you have to move to EDS. I don't think that's the mentality you need to think of this change. It's just more tools that are being given to you in order to do things faster. In my humble opinion, again, to create a JavaScript block is substantially faster than going in and create HTL file, a client-lib file, a dialog XML, and all this good stuff that we have to deal with, right? However, document-based has its own challenges as well because it's a document. You lose a lot of the quote-unquote structure. One of the questions that came up is templates. How can we template document authoring, right? I do it through copy-paste of files. Like, no lie, that's what we do. We have like 6 or 7 files. Each one is named something like a blog page or a home page, and they copy-paste it and change the content. Again, and challenge me if you will, but I don't think any of these technologies is a clear winner. You need to identify what you need. If you're a static page, ADS is a perfect example. It will be more performant, hands down, right? With all its versions, whether you use JAMStack or not, or just simple JS, etc. If you're thinking more server side and you have more computation, I still think AEM is there, right? You just need to understand how you're going to do the front end. Think of AEM as your database and your server. How you manage your front end is up to you. Whether you want to run it headless, do you want to use React? But anyways, I have beef with React in general. But it's just how it is, right? There is no single right solution. I'm going to pause here because I definitely passed my 10 Mississippis.
Very opinionated. He's also provided a couple of great answers, folks, to Q&A, so check those out. Thank you, Rami. Drink your water. Yeah, so there are a couple of product-related questions that I don't think we're going to be able to answer, but it has to do more like a, using. I just lost the question, but yeah, is there a plan to have something like Adobe Core Components for UE? And Daniel tried to reply or provide an answer there, so maybe that helps you out. That was a good question. I guess I can switch it back to the questions that we already had, and maybe Brett, you already talked a little bit about the classic AM approach, and to go back to performance related questions, can classic AM approach realistically match edge delivery services performance without excessive engineering effort? And again, I think you kind of touched on it, but what is the overall approach there?
Sure. So Tad kind of alluded to this a little bit. Like, I think in terms of a traditional page with simple authored content that is served out when in kind of a black box, let's call it a demo site. Probably not actually. EDS is probably going to win that race. It's going to win. EDS on a quick demo site is probably going to score 100 across the board. Traditional AEM, when we do it like on our accelerator for traditional AEM rendered sites, it'll be between 90 and 100. So that extra 10% or so of performance, yeah, it's going to go to EDS. I think, though, that's not the real world scenario to actually consider, right? Every single website has marketing pixels, chat bots, font files, image files, etc., that are all going to bring that score to a spot. And so what EDS does, though, it does puts you in a spot where you're kind of starting, almost like you're starting the race five meters ahead of your competition, right? That doesn't mean you're going to finish the race ahead of them, but it does mean that if you can keep all this other stuff just as clean as the solution that starts at the normal starting line, you might still beat them by that extra 5 meters, right? So, but it absolutely can be achieved. I think where a lot of people have gotten in their minds that they can't achieve it is understand a classic AEM has gone through many iterations, and also many people have worked in AEM without really knowing what they were doing and not working with it the way that it should be doing, and not even doing certain things that optimizations that have come up in recent years, like preloading of font files and stuff like that. So there's definitely optimizations you can do. And if you do those standard front end practices that you should really do on any platform today, a traditional site can absolutely achieve scores in the 70, 80, 90 to 100 range, depending on whether you're doing desktop versus mobile, that are perfectly acceptable in almost any enterprise level situation. It might be an eighth of a second faster on a certain platform, sure, but is that eighth of a second, does that matter for your particular business? It may or may not. I would say in 90% of cases, there really isn't an impactful difference between the performance once you get past the default starting point and actually get to the real site with all the normal stuff that you see on it.
Got it. Daniel, I don't know if you wanted to provide. Yeah.
Sorry, I got a mute button malfunction.
Sure.
I was going to counter a little bit on the full life cycle of an AEM or EDS site as being a little bit of a counter to that, because there's what is the initial functionality and performance of the site when it's first launched by the dream team who is putting it together. Because sometimes you might have one of these premier AEM agencies that goes and throws a site together, and it is really humming when it's put together, and then it's turned over to the team who's going to then own it in perpetuity, who is not the dream team. And so as they're going and adding functionality and saying, oh, I need a so the homepage needs this other thing. Well, how am I going to do that? I don't really know how to do. Okay, I kind of know how to do it in AEM, and the next thing you know, they're adding bolt-ons onto that thing, which are going to decrease performance and reliability. And I think a lot of the safeties, not safeties, but I guess just the overall way of that EDS is put together, it makes it easier for a non premium grade architect to be able to make customizations that are still performant. And so I think that if you said, what does the performance look like, a year or two down the line, after the indigenous home team has gone and had their update cycles, then that might be a different story.
Yeah, I'd say that's a fair counter. It's like kind of going back to what I said at the beginning, where it's like you can do everything, which means there's a lot more wrong ways of doing things in classic AEM versus edge delivery, where it's just like there's less ways of doing it. There kind of is only the right way of doing it, right? So
if you look at some of the, I've just done a couple of on-sites, and if you looked at some of the performance problems that some of these sites were running into, would you or Rami or Daniel know how to make that page that we were looking at run really well? Yes, you would. You would absolutely know how to do that. Does the team there know how to do it? They absolutely do not. They have no idea how to make that run faster, and thus is the problem. They've had that page for years running as non-performant as it is.
Who remembers nested parses? So I've this is recent, ironically enough. Client wanted a table component because we all know columns and tables are so much fun. Everything was performant, and maybe 4 or 5 weeks after we handed in the site, they came back and like, this page is not rendering. And we went back, and 6th level of nesting, that DOM was a spider web. Like, no lie. I had nothing to say. So to your point, Tad, I think part of it is not necessarily the development. We develop with good intentions, right? Just look, I go back to JSPs. JSPs were made with good intentions. Then you hand them to developers, and they're like, how are we going to get this to be a disaster? And we did with JSPs. And it's just how it is. You create these components, and you have good intentions, and then you pass it on to the authors, and you're like, well, it's fair game. And I think EDS, to your point, Tad, and Brett as well, it eliminates that. It hurts the cats. It's almost, it's like, no, this is the block. You're not going to be able to do A, B, and C that you used to do before. If you need that specific pattern, let's go back to that humming team and let them create the block for you.
Right, like to your point, nesting, you just can't nest. You say, how do I nest this tab component inside of an accordion? And the answer is don't. Work out a different way. And there are ways that we find that's the user experience you want. There are ways to do that with CSS and so forth, but you're not doing that with components. You're not doing that with blocks and sticking a block inside of a block inside of a block.
Nested grids are fun too. Okay. Well, yeah. There's a lot of I don't want to call it technical debt, but AEM knowledge debt that happens, and that creates problems with challenges, I should say, with anything from migrations to integrations to like yeah, future proofing your sites and your applications. Okay, let's see. We got time check. We got 11 minutes. We can answer a couple more. Chat's on fire, but I'm gonna go to another one. Since I mentioned future proofing, let's go to Daniel and then Tad first and talk about, are there, or yeah, Daniel can take that on first. But are there situations where you mix models? For example, EDS for some sites, JAMStack for others, within the same organization. And I think you did touch a little bit on that, Daniel, but maybe we can expand on that.
Yeah, sure. I think nothing's stopping us to mix. But like in general, that's something I would maybe recommend, especially if we're talking about like EDS and Next. Like those are two like different worlds in terms of front end, so you would need different skills. So yeah, it wouldn't make sense for one team to do it. Definitely. There is one thing I do like about EDS in terms of mixing, and that's in the context where if you use EDS for EDS blocks for like your main site, like a corporate site, and you have like a block site on the side or even on the same site, you could mix between universal editor and doc-based authoring. I think this is a quite common use case that we see when we talk about mixing, these two different approaches. But it's all about reusability. With EDS, you can rely on the same blocks. If you go with something like Classic or JAMStack and then combining that with document-based editing, possible, yes. Not sure I would recommend it unless there is a good use case behind it. Yeah.
I am totally with you there too, because there's a lot of use cases, especially also when you get to forms. Forms is another one where a lot of the doc-based authoring tools, even DA, which is fabulous, which I'm a big fanboy of. There's the forms user interface for editing AEM forms. It's not there in DA yet. Will be eventually, but that you do all that in Universal Editor and just have those two things happening side by side in the same project. So there's no reason to actually have to say, well, because we're running AEM forms, I guess we have to do our whole website in Universal Editor. So, I mean, to me, that's the wonderful part of all this right now, is that you don't have to, as an architect, say, well, because of one use case, I have to drag all my users through this other UI that they don't want. You just use the UI that makes sense.
Yep. And sticking to future proofing, I don't know if I know Brett mentioned.
Can I talk future proofing for a second? Because okay, for one, so I don't know about you guys, but I really dislike that term.
Future proofing.
Yes, because it is. You know how fast technology switches, and you know also how fast that Adobe changes their mind, and there's no way to be future proof. But the one thing though that I will say is that there's a little bit of like FUD proofing that we kind of had to design around. Because previously when everybody had this thought of like everything is going to go to the cloud always, all the time, and then there was a lot of sales pressure and so forth to get everybody to go to the cloud, and then so you're just like, oh well, I have to. Well, why are you going to migrate your site from 6.5 to cloud service? Well, because I'm scared it's going to go away, and that was the full architectural reason. It was, I'm scared. I'm gonna move. I'm gonna do a multi-million-dollar project because I am scared. And that's not a front end strategy. So the fact right now that we have multiple supported user interfaces and development paradigms that you could just look at on their merits, and they're all going to be supported in perpetuity. You can just say, good, which one makes sense based on who I've got and what I think is the right call for this site. So I think that, and you don't necessarily need to, the tea leaves that you have to read, I think, are a little bit simpler. You can just do it based on its merits, not based on something which is so ephemeral, which is like what do some of these sales execs think or product execs think is going to change.
Yeah. Fear works, man. Why not? Future proof. But it could be feature proof, not
Yeah.
future proof.
Future proof. And honestly, Tad, this is like the wisest thing anybody said on this call. Honestly, future proofing and
Yeah.
that panic attack. No. And a couple of questions were related to that as well. There is a difference when you have Service Pack 2 come out and you're in Service Pack 1 within the same product. That you have to upgrade. Yes, be afraid, be scared, because it has to do with support and everything else. But technology's changed. It just does. I mean, there's definitely a wrong answer, right? But there's also a lot of right answers. Just find the right answer that fits your needs.
Yeah.
Well, and the last thing I'll throw on it there, whoever said it, I wish I could take credit, but I did. Feature proofing is much more than future proofing.
Yep.
And I think it's really understanding, like, pick your path, but then be on that path. Like, you get the value from a framework by using the framework. You get the value by doing things that it expects you to do. So, like, don't try to hammer something into EDS that doesn't belong in EDS. And don't try to make classic EDS by like trying to add a bunch of front end technologies that don't allow you to leverage what the back end of AEM does give you. It's like, pick your path because it's the best that serves your needs, and then actually lean into that path to achieve what you want. Because the more you stay according to the way that the framework expected you to implement it, the more likely you are going to be able to benefit from whatever features hit that flavor of AEM.
Features, definitely. I mean, I agree with everything you said, but I think like the term future proof was like in this context more in terms of like how do you pick like the front-end framework that you're going to use for a project, and you can make a seriously wrong decision that's going to cost a client a lot of money in 5 or 10 years. And it's like you need to make your best guesstimate if this technology is going to be available and up to date. Does it have a good enough community, in 5 years? Because they are investing in their sites now, they're rebuilding them completely. It's not realistic that they will rebuild them again in 3 years, right? So it needs to live at least 5-10 years, depending on the organization. So and EDS took an interesting approach here. They said no framework. We are not using any framework, which is probably the safest choice long term. But then if you use a framework, and there are a lot of companies that have developers experienced in React, Next, Vue, Angular, whatever it is, right? You need to seriously think about it, where this framework is going to be in 5 or 10 years.
Cool. Yeah. The only question that we haven't answered, I think, it should be an easy one, is how much weight do authors' preferences have in architecture decisions? And also on the other end, what I'm seeing is like executives who are not very familiar with AEM architecture, and they're not getting good advice from their architects like Rami. So, how much do they weigh into their conversations? Like,
Don't yell small at once. I can give opinions.
Go ahead.
So there's one on that though, which is I mean I think that the author's opinions should be given a lot of weight,
Yep.
a lot of weight. I mean, number one, when you're dealing with this, when you're dealing with whatever you've created afterwards, the people who are going to be the loudest that are going to try to make you change something afterwards are going to be your authors.
Yes.
It's not going to be the users. So if the users are waiting, like half a second longer, but your authors are having a terrible time, you're going to end up changing out the entire thing. Yep. So going with what your authors really want, making their experience really good, but also making it difficult to muff up, and like making it so that that they can be as self-sufficient as they possibly can. I think is a really good idea.
Yeah.
When you calculate the cost of the content supply chain, a lot of times the technology and supporting technology cost pales in comparison to the content supply chain. So a lot of times I feel like a lot of people look at the cost of, well, if I move to EDS, it's going to cost me this much or whatever, or vice versa. If I use classic AEM and keep on classic AEM and upgrade to cloud service, it's going to cost me X amount IDC. And don't get me wrong, that's a real number that's got to be thought of. But think of what the cost of change management is. Think of the cost by making a page authoring half as long as it takes normally. What does that save your organization? If you're cranking out hundreds of pages per day, that's a lot. If you're cranking out 2 pages per day, it's not a lot. So it's not like there's no universal answer, but you do, like most places, I think, just kind of don't think about that aspect of the content supply chain, because it's all bits and bobs. It's all people, a couple hours a day, a couple hours here and there. So it takes a bit of work to actually build that ROI model, but a lot of times it's more than what you're spending on the technology.
Yep. I don't know if you wanted to take the one last question we got from Jatan here, with the authentication mechanisms for EDS, for edge delivery services. I don't know if anyone has any insights on that.
So we're talking about client-side auth, or are we talking about
Yeah, probably
authentication?
Probably authentication. Yeah, author.
Because if you're talking about author authentication, it obviously depends on what document management system that you're using. Like, are you talking about Universal Editor, in which case you're using IMS, or you're using an SSO on top of IMS? If you're using DA, then again, you're using Adobe IMS or SSO on top of IMS. If you're using your SharePoint, then yeah, you're using your own internal MS to be able to do that. And in terms of client-side authentication, then yeah, you would just be doing that with an edge worker.
Okay.
And do Okta or whatever you're going to do.
Yeah. Well, hope we answered your question there. I don't think we have anything else. I don't know if there are any last minute thoughts or comments from you guys, but I think this was very informational. Feel free to reach out to us in the Adobe Experience League community, and don't forget to go to the Adobe Experience Manager user groups page to subscribe to our office hours channel, the Adobe Champions Office Hours. Thank you to Daniel, who had the idea to do this kind of session, and everyone, Rami, Brett, Tad, participating and providing your expertise, since you're dealing with clients on a daily basis. If we're going to do more sessions, I'm sure, in edge delivery services and AI related stuff, and we're going to see a lot of related things and product announcements in Summit in the spring. So again, if you guys have any comments, feel free to speak now. We're just 1 minute over time. Otherwise, we hope to see you in the next session. We'll try to do once a monthly sessions from the office hour chapter here. And if you have any recommendations for topics, feel free to let us know as well. advocacy@adobe.com, one way to let us know what you want to see. Otherwise, we'll see you guys in the next one. Again, champions, thank you for being in the call, and we can stop recording and see you guys in the next one. I appreciate everyone's participation. Bye, everyone.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, guys.
Bye, everyone.